Hello, this is how to install XAMPP XAMPP, the stack on Windows 11 Pro. Thank you for helping this YouTube channel and for subscribing. So this is a distribution that contains a number of software packages similar to a LAMP stack. It's available on multiple operating systems. We're going to use the Windows operating system. There's the HTTP server Apache. There's the SQL server mariadb. And programming languages, there's PHP and Strawberry Perl. There's applications, web applications, PHP myadmin for a SQL management web application running on top of MariaDB. There's HTTPS support. There's also an FTP server, support for sending email. There's an MTS, mail transport system, and support for running Java websites using the Tomcat Apache servlet technology for Java. And on Windows, there's also the XAMPP control panel, which is a graphical user interface application that allows you to start, stop, reconfigure these components of XAMPP. Let's download and install. Let's go to the web page, apachefriends.org, the homepage of XAMPP. We want the version for Windows, the latest version. It says that if your download doesn't start automatically, and in my case it did not start automatically, it takes me to a SourceForge project. Let's see what we should select in here. I'm not sure what. It says your download will start shortly. Okay, so the file is 64-bit Windows XAMPP, the newest version, and using Visual Studio 16. Let's wait for the file to download. Let's see which versions are available for Windows. So the version that we are provided, 8.2.12, is from 2023, so 2 years and something old. It's only for Windows 64-bit versions, and there's portable versions and installers. The download has finished. Let's run the installer. UAC, user account control, yes. The computer decided to restart. I have installed the file manager Total Commander. Let's actually run it in Elevated as administrator. So I right-clicked on the icon in the start menu, and then I have selected to elevate as administrator. Let's run the installer XAMPP Windows x64 installer.exe. Since the file manager is elevated as administrator, I have no clue what it's trying to say. Something about UAC. A number of years ago, 20 years ago, when we ran desktop software that was actually HTTP servers, it was common to actually disable UAC or to run that software and many other parts always elevated as administrator. So maybe this is a warning that UAC, user account control, is enabled and you should disable it. But then this thing was a long number of years ago. Nowadays, all of the software should just accept Windows 11 as it is with UAC enabled by default and should work out of the box. So if this is what this message box is saying, that I should disable UAC, then this software should step into the modern world with UAC always on Windows. Okay, so this is the installer. By default, the HTTP server Apache is enabled by default. You cannot actually disable it. You can install a very basic installation of XAMPP stack. So just an HTTP S server where you can only serve static files plus PHP. I'm not exactly sure why some of these are optional and some not. I can guess that PHP cannot be disabled because PHP myadmin depends on it. I'm going to keep the defaults and install everything, maybe not Tomcat. We're not going to experiment with Java this time. Next. Okay. Also a reminder of how development used to work like in Windows 15 years ago, when you were using free and open source software packages on Windows. You could hit this issue where you should not have spaces in full paths in Windows. So neither the file name should not contain a space, or the directory name should not contain a space, or a parent directory should not contain a space. That's why it's just easier for everybody if XAMPP is not installed in the correct directory, in the default directory, which is c:/program space files, but in its own dedicated directory where there's no spaces in the path. So c:/XAMPP. Who knows what doesn't work if we're going to change this directory with c:/program files /XAMPP. So we'll keep the default. English. Let's look a bit at the installer while this thing is installing. Let's see what's inside. So the file is pretty large, 160 megabytes in size. So it's an executable with resources, and the larger one is this guy. And this is probably a cabinet file. Not a cabinet file. What else could it be? 7-zip file. Nope. I know, it looks like a archive. FF5D. Okay, so from what it says says unpacking. So I'm going to guess that inside this installer, 160 megabytes, there's all of the software that's available as part of XAMPP. So there's an Apache tarball or archive in there. There's a portable Strawberry Perl, There's a PHP portable version, etc. And indeed, this installer is not downloading maybe anything from the internet. It's just extracting from the resources in this executable and then writing file where it's said, which is c:\\XAMPP. In c:\\XAMPP, you would find something very similar to a Linux operating system. So it's a distribution of free and open source software. A ton of libraries, a ton of programming languages with runtimes, and other software. There's probably, in order to have the Apache HTTP server running on Windows, there's the APR and other libraries there. And this looks like you would install software on Linux not to /usr but to /opt, because there's special directories for HTTPD, for mariadb, for perl, for PHP, for the server FTP server FileZilla, for the MTA, Mail Transfer Agent. There's a ton of the libraries that you would expect in a Linux style distribution. There's the iconv, there's SQLite 3. Let's see the others. Apache, libapr, libapr iconv, libapr util, etc. zlib. Let's see what's in the Perl directory. A ton of Perl modules available out of the box. The Visual C++ runtime is probably provided somewhere in here. This is the GNU C++ standard library libstd C++. Okay, and there's batch files for starting and stopping the various services. There's the control panel, XAMPP-control.exe, and the root directory where the HTTPD server from Apache is serving files is this directory, c:\\XAMPP /htdocs. We're using HTTP server, and this Windows 11 Pro machine is actually a virtual machine. There's actually no reasons to have a Windows firewall on this machine. So I'm going to allow the rule for incoming HTTP server, but still I want to disable all traces of the Windows firewall. Windows Defender firewall with advanced security. There's 3 profiles in here. Domain, off, private, and public. For all of these, I'm going to set the firewall state to off. This is protection in case you're available on the internet. If somehow people from other countries can easily connect to your computer and you're running TCP servers that are listening on a port on your computer. But this scenario is really hard to ever find yourself in, because if you're going to use a local area network, you're going to probably be behind network address translation, so your computer is not actually going to be reachable from the internet. So I'm not exactly sure when the Windows firewall comes in handy. I didn't have any use for it. If I'm going to expose a computer to the internet and have it serve a TCP server, that computer is probably not going to use the Windows operating system. It's probably going to use the Linux operating system. I'm going to have indeed a firewall. I'm going to expose the SSH server on a different port than 22, etc. So the computers that are actually the aim of the computer is to be available to the greater internet using a routable, publicly visible IPv4 address, then that's a very different story. And in cases like that, you should take a ton of security measures. But in this case, it's just a virtual machine, just for testing, Windows 11 Pro. I totally have zero reasons to run the Windows firewall. Do you want to start the XAMPP control panel now? Yes. And this is how it looks like. There's buttons to start and stop. Buttons that probably run these batch files. So Apache start is this row and this column, so this cell to start Apache. We're not going to start Apache first. We're going to actually look at the configuration files. So let's do that. All of the files. So it's using by default this interesting, very basic text editor, which is the Windows Notepad, which I would not use. Okay, so it says that the root directory is where we expect, which is :/XAMPP htdocs. In there's probably a index file. In this case, it's index.php. There's also a favorite icon, favicon.ico. Web browsers will probably show this icon in the tab bar as the icon for this website. It says that's listening on port 80, so the HTTP without S, the HTTP, not HTTPS server is going to listen on the local computer. I'm not sure on which of the IP addresses. Probably by default, it listens on all of the IPv4 addresses. You can specify just one IPv4 address, just one network interface card, if that's what you prefer. So I'm going to keep the default 80. This might be a problem if you have the HTTP server from Windows enabled. So that's, let's see where that server is. How do we get to the control panel? Software, turn Windows features on or off. And this was the group. The Windows built-in HTTP and HTTPS server is available out of the box in Windows 11 Pro, but it's not activated or enabled. So the packages are here, but not exposed on the file system. So we need to enable some Windows features. At least this guy. Internet Information Services. This is the FTP server listening on port 21. And then this is the this guy. World Wide Web Services. This is the HTTP server from Microsoft, from Windows. And there's a graphical user interface management tool for the Windows server. We can see that the Windows HTTP server is not running, is not even enabled. So that's why we're keeping the default TCP port to 80. If we want to have on the same computer running both IIS, the Microsoft Windows HTTP server, and Apache, then we're going to probably keep the default ports for IIS and change the ports for Apache. And here it is where you do it. So from the XAMPP control panel, row Apache, column config, this cell, click on it and change the port to something different than 80. The Apache HTTPD server has a ton of modules. Let's see if the PHP one is in here. It doesn't say anything. It just says that index.php can be used instead of index.html. Okay, let's keep reading the configuration file a bit. So we were at line 80, then we looked at the modules for Apache. So all of these modules are actually DLL files, so dynamically loadable DLL files from Windows or portable executables. Still, the file name ends with .so Linux style, not .dll. But it's just changing the extension from DLL to .so. No other changes happening here. Okay, what other settings are there? If you want to change the TCP port, you probably also want to work on this line, line 229, to change the address from localhost :80 to something else. Again, because no other HTTP server is using the listening on TCP port 80, there's no need to actually change anything in this configuration file. Okay, if module. Okay, let's look at the other configuration files. The first configuration file, http.conf, didn't really talk much about HTTPS. And there's a separate file, httpd-ssl.conf, which probably talks about the default TCP port where the HTTPS server should listen to, which is port 443. Okay, so the Apache HTTPD executable, httpd.exe, will listen on two different TCP ports on the host computer, port 80 for the protocol HTTP, port 443 for protocol HTTPS, yes. And probably you need to also change on line 121 if you want to change the port from 443 to something else. The default cryptography. Okay, so when you say HTTPS, you mean pairs of public-private keys. There's a certificate authority. There's a chain of trust starting from the recognized certificate authorities towards the certificate of the website that you're navigating towards. And that chain of trust needs to actually exist inside the HTTPS client, so inside the web browser. Okay. What else can we specify? Okay, so in here it says load module PHP from the correct directory. So there's a special directory where PHP is installed, :/XAMPP/PHP. Okay, and then there's a /licenses, a /PHP myadmin, and a /webalizer. So let's look at all of these resources one by one. I'm going to use a web browser. And I want to navigate to one of the IP addresses on the current computer. So let's actually see which are those. ipconfig space/all. So there's just two network interface cards, the local loopback with 127.0.0.1 and the Ethernet one. The Ethernet one has this IPv4 address ending with 122.239. So we should be able to ping these. And to ping localhost. And it's using IPv6. Let's make sure that TCP IPv4 works correctly. And it does. One to 7.0.0.1. As a trick, you can probably use more IPv4 addresses than 127.0.0.1, but it's the exact same thing. It's still going to use the local loopback. So we know two IPv4 addresses, this guy and this guy. We know one network interface name, this guy, localhost. And we can also probably ping the NetBIOS name of the computer. Okay, so any of these will work if we want to connect to the HTTP server. We forgot to start the server first. So let's start the HTTPD server. Let's start the SQL server. Let's start, that's it. Let's look a bit also at the configuration of mariadb. So it's using the default MySQL TCP port 3306. And everything else seems to just be configured correctly. So now we have two servers running and listening. You can see the ports that these servers are listening to. So there's port 80 and 443 for HTTP and HTTPS protocols, and port 3306 for MySQL style TCP. And let's try to connect using such a command line. So HTTP without S, / the name of the computer, Win11 in my case. It does work, it does use HTTP, it doesn't switch automatically to HTTPS. And let's look at the root directory and see if this is what we expect. We don't have a Visual Studio Code installed, so let's actually install it. It's a good moment. Microsoft Visual Studio Code, accept, download for Windows. The downloads directory of the current user. It was pretty fast, so probably it's an online installer, just a small installer that will download the needed packages from the internet. It installs for the current user, so per user installation. It says that it's extracting files. Let's actually look at the size of the file. So 119 megabytes. So it's not an online installer, it's a full installer, full offline. This is the first start of the editor, the integrated development environment. How do we close all of these things? Let's see if we need to restart probably the file manager. No need. Trust, so click on the checkbox trust the authors, and then the button yes, I trust the authors. And then let's close the suggestion to install updates or packages. Let's close the chat tool window and compare side by side this page with what we have in the directory that the HTTP server is serving from, so the root directory. So top level, the only thing that so this is how we started. We provided to the HTTP server the URL http://win11, which means that we did not provide any path, just the host name, which means that the HTTP server will try to look inside the root directory, and in the worst case scenario, it will show the content of the root directory. But there's no need for such a thing because there is a top-level file that we saw in the configuration files previously. It has a special name, index.php, so it's going to actually run this file. And this file is associated with the mod PHP Apache HTTPD module, so it loaded that one. It provided a full path towards it, so :\XAMPP PHP /PHP version.dll. And this is how it's able to display inside the web browser this thing. Let's see what this thing does. Let's change a bit the settings. I want the source code lines to be word wrapped. This means that I do not want to scroll left or right in source code files text editors. It's enough if I just scroll up and down. Okay, so let's see what this page does. Says that it's actually changing the location to whatever we provide, so http://win11/dashboard/. and this sends an HTTP row header, the header being location colon. So this is what indeed happened. It navigated to whatever URL we provided, which is this part, and then appended /dashboard/ this part. Okay, let's see what this file does. So there's a top-level directory /dashboard. Yes, there is. And in here, because we did not see the listing of the directory, there's also a magical file with the name index.html, this guy. And this is what we're seeing right now. So the title of the page is Welcome to XAMPP. We can see it in here. There's a favorite icon. And hopefully the text that we expect is in here. So there's a SVG, this guy. Dashboard image is XAMPP-logo.svg. There's I'm not sure what this thing is. So it's an H1 with a span. But then what's inside the span is not bold and the rest is bold. Okay, maybe because it's using CSS to style a H1 that also is a span. Okay, so the text that we expect: XAMPP, Apache plus mariadb plus PHP plus Perl. The H2 welcome to XAMPP, and then additional P's paragraphs. 3 paragraphs, and community is H3. So that's not expected. There's H3, H2, and H1. This should also be an H2. Copyright 2022. Okay. And then from the configuration file, the row Apache config, and then httpd-xampp.conf. We can see there's some other web applications in here, other websites. So there's a /licenses, which means top level. So just hostname and then /licenses. Let's see what that thing is. /licenses. Okay, so /licenses is actually the directory /xampp/licenses. Let's actually open a second Visual Studio Code on the entire installation directory /xampp. And see what's happening in here. So there's top level directory /licenses. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to immediately after you install XAMPP to put the entire directory under version control in Git. This way, anything you change, and the most important things that you change is the content of htdocs and the configuration files for Apache, which are these files, this guy, and this guy, and this guy. You can change anything fearlessly. You're under version control. You have Git commits. You can always roll back easily. And you also know what you have changed by accident from the last moment that you did the Git commit. Okay. So there's a licenses directory, and there's no magic top level file. There's no index.php, no index.html, HTM. So Apache, the HTTP server, sees that there's a directory, and it should show the listing of the directory, similar to how an FTP server would behave by just listing the contents of the directory. Okay, let's look at the help for the licenses for Apache. It should say Apache public license version 2, version 1.1. Okay. From what I can see, the actual license of Apache HTTPD is ASL, Apache Software License version 2, not version 1. Apache license. So not Apache Software License 1.1, but Apache License 2.0. This file might actually exist in the installation directory of Apache. Where could that be? License, this guy. Okay, so this seems wrong and this seems correct. Yeah. XAMPP is not up to date, didn't receive any update in 2 years and something. You should definitely not use XAMPP in production in this case. When you're using a production HTTP server that you're actually exposing it to the internet, you need as fast as possible updates. So the moment when a new security update from HTTPD Apache project appears, that same day you should have it available and be able to install it on your production HTTP server. And the same for the rest of the software packages in there, OpenSSL, especially the PHP programming language and runtime. The most vulnerable part of your AMP, Apache HTTP, the mysql, mariadb, and programming languages starting with P, the most security sensitive in there is going to probably be the part where you're running runtimes for interpreting scripts in programming languages, and especially PHP. PHP doesn't have the greatest track record for security. And if you're using Tomcat, that's also going to be even more security sensitive because the JDK, JRE, the Java runtime, and software development kit tend to have many issues which require a new release multiple times a year. Let's see some other ways in which we can specify the URL inside the web browser. So protocol, and then we can specify localhost, and then the port, TCP port 80. So this works as well. You can specify the HTTPS protocol. The part where you specify the TCP port is optional. The web browser doesn't trust the HTTPS security certificate that I provide from the HTTPD server. Accept the risk and continue. And it's showing in here that the security certificate is not trusted by any of the root certificate authorities that are trusted by Mozilla Firefox. And also, no certificate was generated when we installed XAMPP. So I would have expected that because XAMPP is installing an HTTPS server, is going to ask if I want to register the certificate authority in the Windows Certificate Authority store for the current user, and then generate a self-signed certificate using the certificate authority that's part of XAMPP, and then it will generate an HTTPS certificate. But that's not the case. It says that the certificate that we're using right now for connecting via HTTPS to localhost, not only that it doesn't use a certificate authority that's trusted by Firefox, but the entire HTTPS certificate has expired 7 years ago. Okay, so fixing the HTTPS security is not that easy. You will need to have knowledge of which web browsers do you want to support, at which versions, which cryptography algorithms you should support in the HTTPS server, how to generate a HTTPS certificate that's actually valid, maybe one that doesn't cost too much or maybe nothing, using probably Let's Encrypt project. Or if you want to use for development purposes a self-signed certificate, and then you would register either the certificate or the certificate authority, the CA root that you have and you have generated yourself to the store of trusted security certificates in Windows per user probably, and hopefully Firefox is using the same security certificate store as Windows is. In the past, Mozilla Firefox used to have its own certificate store that didn't have anything to do with the one in Windows. So you would actually had to both install your certificate authority per user in Windows, but also in the Firefox profile. Let's see what other surprises we have in there. So there's a /php myadmin. Just one slash. So this is a web application that you probably have used before if you have used MySQL before, and the AMP stack, Apache, HTTP, MySQL, mariadb, and then Perl, Python, or PHP. Okay, so this application allows you to do CRUD, create, read, update, and delete of entire MySQL databases. Let's see how that is being done. We'll create a new database with the today's date. I don't know what collation to use, which is the better one. It's great that they support UTF-8. MB4 sounds like what? Actually, don't know. Okay. Probably more than the simple basic plan or something. I don't know. UTF, Unicode things. CI in the sense of collation. So this is the character set to use in string cells, but also the sort order. So there's in this case CI, which probably means case insensitive sort order. Okay. And these are the existing databases. We're going to create a database. Has been created, and now we can create tables inside this database. New table. Let's do a books. A bookstore. A library. What is this? Name. So name, the first one should be author ID, type integer, and should be primary key. How do we select that? PK auto increment. I don't know. And then first name and second name. And then that's it. How do we delete the fourth one? And these are strings, whatever is the best type for strings. Could be varchar. Hopefully varchar is Unicode. Okay, let's see if varchar requires a length. Is there a max? Default null. Varchar 1 to 5. Table comments collation inodb versus my ISAM. No partitions. This guy is a PK, like this. Best options. Okay, how do we do auto increment? I don't know. And preview SQL. So create table, the name of the database, the name of the table, and then within parentheses, the first column, correct, second column, correct, third column, PK author ID, and somehow we need to specify auto increment, and I don't know how to do that. Save. Okay, and at this point you can start inserting data. So there's this tab to insert. Author ID. What is this thing? value 1. So we'll do auto increment by hand. And we can insert 2 at once. What is this? Ignore. Go. Insert into, correct. And do it. Go. Duplicate entry 1. What should I do? Okay, and let's browse. So it has already inserted automatically. So you don't need to press go once again. So this is it. The application that you would expect. It actually looks nice. It works. It's an actually open source application that has always been around, and there's not much to complain about it. It's really, really important while developing if you're not using another MySQL or MariaDB graphical user interface tool application. And sometimes people actually install phpMyAdmin on production servers where the production MySQL or MariaDB is actually running, and they fix issues inside the database while the actual production website is running. Okay, let's see what other web applications we have. Webalizer. What is that? Forbidden. Okay, so in case of error, it says forbidden. Let's try to change the protocol. And it's the same thing. I gave up trying to make Webalizer work. I'm not exactly sure what this website is about. Let's do some simple PHP files, following a PHP tutorial from W3 Schools. So we're in the root directory, htdocs. And let's start the tutorial. So it says that we should have a PHP file. So let's create that. How do we do that? New file. Okay, that doesn't work. So test.php. So it's just an HTML page. HTML5 because of the doc type. And let's run it. http://localhost/test2.php. Test. Okay. Yay, finally. So in order not to have this final part of the URL where you specify the name of the file and not to have the extension .php, you could use the magic name, so index.php, but you could create a subdirectory. So let's actually do that. Test. Move the file in there. Yes. And now if we refresh, the file will stop existing. This is the correct URL now. And we can not specify the name of the file if we rename the file with the magic name index.php. Where is it? Like this. Okay, so that was just a plain HTTP only file. HTML only file. Okay, let's add some server-side scripting using PHP. It does work. Okay, let's echo more lines. It does work. Okay, how do we continue? At the top of the page, there's the next button. PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. It's a programming language with a runtime. And handy is the fact that it has perfect integration with Apache, the HTTPD server, but also with other HTTP servers. So it's meant for creating web apps, websites, and for incrementing what you have by default. If you just install Apache HTTPD, which is just the ability to serve static websites, just listing of directories plus HTML plus CSS plus JavaScript plus SVG. And now with the PHP runtime, you can also have execution of source code while pages are being served, so server-side rendering. For instance, if you want to write the current date and time and millisecond, for instance, and each time the user presses the refresh button on the website, the user should be served fresh time, then that cannot be done if you're just using static files, with the exception of JavaScript that allows you to see the date, but then you're going to see the timestamp of the web browser and of the client operating system, not of the server operating system and of the server PHP and the server Apache HTTP server. Okay, it's amazing and it's used intensively in the real world. We have installed PHP. Let's see what this thing does. .2.12. Let's see if we can replace the entire text with just this echo line. And it doesn't work because the PHP runtime considers that plain text files are HTML files. It does not matter the extension. You actually need to use a block, for instance, this type of block with less than $PHP. PHP code goes here. Default PHP extension for files .php. Echo. We already did all of these. Next. Comments. So we can have single line. Multiple line. And shell scripting style. Okay. Next. Multi-line comments. Yeah, we got the idea. In the middle of the text, variables with this interesting syntax. A variable must start with the $sign, followed by the name of the variable. Case-sensitive programming, which is better than the alternative. Let's see how we print things. Semicolons at the end of instruction lines. Let's see auto-completion in Visual Studio Code. Globals. So it's an array to string conversion. So it knows how to do numeric to string conversion. The index.php file functions in this way. Everything is treated as plain text HTML, with the exception of the blocks that should be interpreted by the PHP executable. The PHP executable just takes this block, interprets it, and then the standard output of the PHP interpreter is inserted in here instead of lines 5 through to 11. It's going to actually insert a single line 5 John with no spaces, because we did not specify a new line anywhere. So let's see how that is done. So now we have a new line inside the HTML source code, but that just renders as a space in a web browser. So we actually want a BR. Something like this. Output variables. Okay, so you can do interpolation like this if you want. So let's have this thing be John. And echo with string interpolation. Cool. And string concatenation with dot, not with plus. Numerics addition. Loosely typed language. Strict and non-strict requirements. Variables and data types. So we had a string and an integer. Echo knows how to print both, but doesn't know how to print more complex types, such as arrays, string int float bool array object null. I'm not sure what this thing is, and mixed. Okay, and at runtime we can inspect many details about a variable. What's its content, what's its type. Did I do semicolon? Expecting colon, comma, or semicolon. Okay, so it says that $x is a variable of type string with length 4 and with content this thing. Which is cool. Okay, it knows how to show also arrays. So let's do that. Var dump using the variable that we couldn't print previously, which is which of these? No, env. There's no elements in the array env. Request. Request is also empty. Okay. Multiple values. I don't like this type of syntax in any of the programming languages. I never use it. As in any programming language, there's 10% of the language, the programming language that I actually use, and then various things that I don't ever use. Either because I don't have a need for it, or because I actively try to not do those things. And then scoping. There's global and function scope. Let's see what that does. So there's a top level variable x, and then inside will not work. So inside the functions, you don't have access to the global scope. Why would that be? Undefined variable x on line 11. Why doesn't it say on line 11 and then colon 20 or something, 41? It certainly knows the column. Variable x inside function is, variable x outside function is 5. Okay, so this is totally not expected. Global scope to not be available inside of functions. The other way around, of course, does not work. If you have a local variable inside a function, that will not be available outside of that free function. Okay, error on line 14. Static scope. Yeah, static is what you would expect. For counters, that's what you use it for. There's no breakpoints in here because we did not enable the PHP support in Visual Studio Code. Zero, 1, 2. So although it's a local variable inside the free function myTest, its value is static. So when you run the function the first time, x will be assigned the value 0 because it doesn't exist. But then after it exits the first execution of myTest, $x will remain somewhere related to this free function, and when you call it again, this line will probably not be executed, will be skipped. $x will be found somewhere related to my test with the value 1 because it was incremented at the end of the execution, and then a 1 will be printed, and then the value will be incremented to 2. Global keyword. So because inside free functions you don't have access to global variables, you want to make them available inside the scope of the free function using global. So with global you import from the global scope towards the function scope. Global, super global. See what that works. Let's actually inspect its value. So there's a get array that's empty, a post array that's empty, cookies array that's empty, and the files array that's empty. So files probably is the array of files that you have uploaded via the web browser, and get might be, I don't know, either the URL, the query part, relative path, whatever, of parts of the URL, or maybe the headers of the GET request. Let's actually test this thing. Test 2. Okay, it doesn't work. Old question mark. Yeah, so it's the URL is exposed inside underscore get. Or not. There's this 2 that points to string. I don't know. So some global variables I can declare, but some are already pre-declared by the PHP runtime. Echo and print. Echo has no return value. Print has a return value of 1. Echo can take multiple parameters. Print can take only one argument. Okay, echo can be used with or without parentheses, which means that I'm always going to use with parentheses. Yeah, maybe similarly to Perl version 2, echo wasn't actually a function, it was a built-in or something. That's why you can omit the parentheses, and it's still going to work okay. How do we put? Okay. I don't like any form of auto-completion in Visual Studio Code. Let's disable all of those. Auto-closing brackets. Never. Auto-closing comments. Never. Auto-closing quotes. Never. Okay. Way better. Output text. Yeah, you'll need to be really careful because inside PHP blocks, what you have should be valid PHP, so you can't just put random HTML in here. And in order to actually generate HTML, you need to use either echo or print, and then you will need to consider how you escape double quotes and other characters. So multiple arguments to echo. var args style. I'm not sure why or how Visual Studio Code does have support for PHP out of the box. It knows about this function. Okay, we already saw that we can put do string interpolation like this with just the name of the variable, including the preceding $sign. Strings are surrounded by quotes. There's single quotes and double quotes. Also in Bash, there's single quotes and double quotes. When using double quotes, you can have variables in there. With single quotes, they will not be expanded, the value. Okay, we can see by the syntax highlighting that this is actually string literal and will not suffer any other interpretation. Whereas if we use double quotes, it's showing that $txt1 is in a different color, so it's actually a variable that's the actual output, the actual value that's stored inside the variable will be replaced instead of these 5 characters. Okay, we can use a dot operator to concatenate strings. There's also print. Print can be used with or without parentheses. So again, if parentheses are optional, I'm going to use them each time. Let's see what print does. Okay, so you cannot use the comma operator to have multiple parameters in print. Okay, we saw everything there is to know about echo and print. Data types, we saw about var dump, var underscore dump. Integer is, I don't know, 32-bit, what's shown here. base 10, base 16, base 8, base 2, negative or positive, must not have a decimal point, at least one digit. Okay. Floating point number. This works as I would expect. Bool. So this true is shown by the syntax highlighter in Visual Studio Code with a different color than a float literal, and then a variable, or then a function call. So it's something, an entity that actually exists, the type bool. And probably case sensitive, hopefully. No, it's not case sensitive. Wow. And how case insensitive it is. So variable names, so identifiers are case sensitive, but then true is not case sensitive. And function names are also case insensitive. Wow. That's really bad. I want case sensitiveness everywhere. Array data type. So you use array as a function, and then a varargs can have anything in here, including a true. Says that on the position 2, which is the third position, there's the boolean true. And then there's objects. Wow. And this should be it. We'll stop here. So there's a class car, there's a constructor call with 2 parameters, which is defined in here, public function, special name probably, underscore construct. This red is actually $color, this Volvo is actually $model, and they're assigned to the field, which are public, so 2 public fields of type string and string, and then public method that uses the hidden parameter this, which is probably passed as the first parameter in all member functions. Accesses color, which is a string, concatenates everything, and then returns this as the return value of the method message. Object car is color red and model Volvo. So this is it. XAMPP was the thing that you used a number of years ago if you wanted the AMP stack on Windows. Maybe you were developing exclusively on Windows, but you were deploying exclusively on Linux. Maybe you had a VPS, virtual private server. Somebody was hosting websites. You bought a service from them, and then you bought your DNS domain, and that hoster was hosting your HTTP site, and maybe offering additional services like some email addresses, storage for a MySQL database, which allowed you to do 99% of what websites for very small enterprises require. So the websites for small businesses are very, very similar. They're typical. There's a DNS name with the website that you would expect. So www. The name of the company.com, for instance, or other top-level domain for your country. And then there's always, I don't know, around 5 pages there. There's index.html, there's contact.html. You would have a on the contact page actually a PHP form where people could contact you without actually calling your number or emailing you, which that form required XAMPP email functionality, and you probably also had some news, some blog posts top level on the page, which maybe are stored as blobs in a very simple MySQL database. And if you wanted to develop on Windows, you needed a stack that was extremely similar to what the VPS had, which is Apache HTTPD plus PHP plus MySQL. And the simplest method to do it, again, 15 years ago, was XAMPP. Simple installer, simple configuration panel. The aim was to develop and change the top-level directory with HTML root, so this one, the htdocs directory. You would actually delete everything in here and start by creating an index.php file, and then the rest of the files. Change the favorite icon, of course. When this is done, you're going to use the FileZilla FTP client to upload to the VPS, and then that's it. You have a new version of the web server of the website on the VPS virtual private server. So that was the job named web development. So this is it, but nowadays I cannot prove that XAMPP is maintained. I'm not exactly sure why you would use it. Maybe because you're still developing on Windows and you're not using Windows subsystem for Linux. You're not connecting to a Linux remote computer using remote desktop protocol. I'm not exactly sure. Or maybe you just want to use full Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, for editing PHP files. That might also be a possibility. So this is it. This was XAMPP, the way to install an AMP stack on Windows 15 years ago. Thank you.